Chapter 11 of The Adventures of the 11 Cuff Buttons. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kathleen. The Adventures of the 11 Cuff Buttons by James Francis Thierry. Oh, this is terrible. Billy Budd stole them, not me. He came into my room early Monday morning while I was dressing, and showed me the pair of cuff buttons he said he had stolen during Sunday night, and gave me one to keep for him until he had a good chance to dispose of it. Then, right after I returned from calling on you to inform you of their loss, which was about 10:30, he and I went out to the stables and gave the other one to Olaf, here to hide for him. "Here's the one I have been keeping, Mr. Holmes," stammered Thornycroft, as he took the second sparkling cuff button out of his vest pocket and laid it on the table beside the one recovered from Olaf. "When the village constables came up here to search us, I simply slipped the thing into the upper edge of my shoe until they had gone, and I've been carrying it here in my vest pocket ever since." And Eustace paused as he drew out his handkerchief and mopped his perspiring face. "Then you had it right with you when you burst into my office in Baker Street to tell me of the loss, and your nervous excitement at the time was a fake, you big stiff?" Holmes asked, blowing out a cloud of cigarette smoke. "Yes, I acknowledge with shame that I did, but it was that scoundrel Budd that burglarized his lordship's room and stole the jewels originally, and the coachman and myself are both simply receivers of stolen goods, not robbers. Oh, your lordship, this is awful," Eustace added, turning to the Earl. "I am a graduate and an honor man of Oxford University, as you know, and I surely must have been intoxicated when I let Budd entice me into this damnable scheme. The reason he took the jewels was because he had been losing heavily at cards in London recently, as he told me, and wanted to sell them to recoup his losses. I'll swear I didn't have a thing to do with the disappearance of the other 9 cuff buttons, because if I did, I'd tell you. That's all." The Earl looked at Holmes sitting there, puffing out smoke in a very dégagé attitude, with the smile of triumph still on his eagle-like face, in spite of his absurd disguise. Then he looked at the confused and embarrassed Thornycroft standing at one side of the table, anxiously rubbing his hands. Then he looked at the red-faced Olaf standing near him, and finally he looked at me sitting in another chair, furnishing the calm and sober background for all this sensationalism, as usual. "Well, by Jove, I hardly know what to say, and that's the truth, Holmes," he remarked at length. "But the fact that my recreant secretary has just now voluntarily coughed up the second cuff button, without trying to hide it again in his shoe, as he might have done, inclines me to let him live this time. So I'll forgive you, Eustace, but don't you ever let it happen again, or I might forget myself so far as to have you blackballed from all of the London clubs you belong to," added the Earl, shaking his finger at Eustace. "Thank you, your lordship, thank you," cried the latter profusely. "I shall endeavour to deserve your consideration by doing my best to help you find the other cuff buttons still missing." "Keep the change, Eustace," said the Earl dryly. "Now, Holmes, what'll we do with this little stiff over here?" And he pointed to the still trembling coachman, who stood fumbling his cap in his hands. "Why, he looks harmless enough," commented Holmes. "I knew he didn't have brains sufficient to plan the robbery, but was merely Billy Budd's tool. So I think you might as well forgive him too, your lordship, and thus get all the State's evidence they can turn for us. Thornycroft," he added, turning to the secretary, "you accused Luigi Vermicelli, the Earl's valet, of having stolen the cuff buttons, and you there, Olaf, accused your stable partner, Carol Linescu, of the theft. I shall give your statements due consideration, and lay for the accused parties accordingly. Now, Watson, we'll get busy and see if we can't recover some more of the cuff buttons before luncheon. It's only a little after 9 now," looking at his watch, "and we have nearly 3 hours left. And, by the way, I believe I made a bet of £5 with Billy Budd yesterday morning that I would find some of the cuff buttons that same day. He won the bet, since I didn't find the heirlooms until today. But inasmuch as the aforesaid Budd is a fugitive from justice, I'll just confiscate the stakes and call myself the winner." Doc, hand over those £10 you've been keeping there." I did so at once, glad to be relieved of the responsibility, and old Hemlock Holmes was about $25 ahead by Bud's disappearance, although still 9 diamond cuffs behind. "You may go back to the stables now, Olaf," said the Earl to the coachman, who beat it immediately, glad to get out of any further arraignment. "And you, Eustace, can get busy again with these darned bills we were auditing when Holmes came in with his news." He took up the 2 glittering baubles, put them in his pocket, and drew up his chair again to the table, while Eustace resumed his former seat. "Oh, say, I nearly forgot. We must celebrate a little on this," the Earl suddenly cried, as he pounded his fists on the table. "Harrigan," he called out, "bring up a bottle of my very best Burgundy, and set 'em up to Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson, in honor of the glad return of my ancestors' historic cuff buttons." The jovial butler seemed always to be within earshot whenever the Earl wanted him, and in a moment entered the library and ventured: "The best Burgundy you have is the 1874 Beaune, your lordship. Shall I bring that?" "Sure, PDQ. I'm feeling a little dry again, anyhow," said the Earl, as he winked at us, while the still somewhat embarrassed Thornycroft looked out of the window at the birds singing their spring songs among the trees. Harrigan left the room, and in a few minutes returned from the cellar with a long dark bottle that seemed to hold the ruby red sparkles of the sunset on the hills of eastern France imprisoned in its depths. He uncorked it, and deftly poured out 3 glasses of the ancient wine, one of which the Earl took up in his hand, while Holmes and I each took one of the remaining 2. "Eustace, I'll have to cut you out of this, I'm sorry to say. Holmes, I drink to your swift and happy recovery of the other 9 cuff buttons. Prosit." At the welcome word of cheer we each put ourselves outside of the finest fermented grape juice that ever trickled down my throat. "Thanks. Now we'll get down to business again," said Holmes, full of renewed pep, as he set down his glass on the table and turned to me. "Doc, let's go up to our room while I get this horrible suit of clothes off of me, and wash the red grease paint off my face." "Ta-ta, your lordship. See you later, with some more cuff buttons, I expect." And we both left the library and went upstairs, where Holmes rapidly changed his clothes and washed off the make-up in the lavatory nearby. When he stood before me again in civilized habiliments, he began: "Doc, I'm going to jump into this man Vermicelli, the valet. My deductions lead me to believe that he has another one of the jewels stowed away somewhere, and it's up to me to find it." So we left our room and went down the stairway, hot on the trail of the slippery valet from Venice. As we rounded the foot of the stairway at the 2nd floor, halfway down to the main scene of operations, Holmes' quick ear detected the sound of voices in a room nearby, though my slower ears couldn't hear a thing. He put his finger to his lips, took me by the arm, and quietly stole along the corridor with me to the half-open door whence the subdued voices proceeded. Arriving there, we halted, while Holmes cautiously listened a moment, then put his head in at the door and coughed. He pushed the door open immediately and walked in, with me at his heels, determined not to miss any of it, whatever it was. Seated in a rocking chair by the window was the elderly figure of the Countess's bachelor uncle, J. Edmund Tooter, the retired tea and spice merchant from Hyderabad, India, holding his niece's Spanish maid, Teresa Olivano, on his lap. As we entered so unceremoniously, the 2 of them ceased their billing and cooing, hastily relaxed the half-Nelson grip they had on each other, and faced us with considerable resentment showing in their faces, though Teresa didn't get off Tooter's lap, as I thought she would. "Well, what do you mean by this impudent intrusion, Holmes?" demanded Tooter angrily. "I guess a man can hold his affianced wife in his lap if he feels like it, without having a cheeky detective walk in on him." "Your what?" asked Holmes, with surprise. "My affianced wife, I said, and it's none of your business, either, any more than it is my niece's or the Earl's. We had planned to elope and get married in London this afternoon, but I suppose now you'll run around and tell everybody in sight what you know." Tooter whispered something to Teresa, whereupon she gave him a parting kiss, flounced off his lap, and passed out of the room. with her head high in the air, her black eyes snapping, and saying something that sounded like "impertinent loafers" as she passed us. Uncle Tooter arose from the rocker and stood by the window, where he seemed to be trying to slide something from his left hand into his left trousers pocket, his right side being turned to us. Holmes noticed the act, as I did, but said nothing of it for the moment. "Well, Tooter, by George, I'm surprised at you," he commented sarcastically. "To think that at your advanced age, and you must be pretty well up in the 50s, you'd fall for the sweet love in the springtime stuff that gets the younger people, and that you'd engage yourself in marriage with a servant, too, and one who had previously refused you a couple of times. Of course, as you say, it's none of my business, but I'm used to having people tell me that. And furthermore, it comes within the line of my duty to intrude my nose into other people's business whenever I judge it to be warranted by the circumstances. Teresa has been accused by Natalie, the first chambermaid, of having stolen the diamond cuff buttons, which is an infernal lie, and I can prove it," shouted Tooter. "And you have been accused inferentially by the Earl of possible guilt in connection with the theft also, owing to your occasional lapses from sobriety." "Which is rather a polite way of putting it," went on the unperturbed Holmes. "By the way, I'll just trouble you for that little package you slid into your left trousers pocket there." Tooter flushed with embarrassment, and refused point blank. "Watson, lock the door and put the key in your pocket," yelled Holmes. Chapter 11.